So I, 26, female, have an older sister, 30, female, who I haven't been in touch with for the past 6 years. We didn't have a fallout or fight. We weren't in touch because she just disappeared one day. 6 years ago, my sister dumped her twin toddlers at my place and told me that she'd be back at the end of the day after running some errands. Her kids were 1.5 years old at the time, and I agreed to watch over them for a while because it wasn't uncommon for my sister to ask me to babysit her kids if I was at home, and she had work to do or if our aunt was unavailable. Our parents had passed away when we were both young, like when we were 10 or something, and we'd been brought up by our maternal aunt, 46, female. But my guess is that on the day that she brought the kids to my place, my aunt was sick, or else she would have taken them to her. Knowing what I know now, I was in my final year of college and was living in an apartment with a couple of my friends back then, but none of them were home on that day and were out celebrating since we were supposed to graduate in just a few weeks. I looked after the kids for a few hours, but began to worry after 9 because my sister had never been that late. I tried to call her several times, but the calls wouldn't go through, and she wasn't responding to my text messages. So I waited for a few minutes more, but then decided to call my aunt for help, and she tried to call my sister as well. But even her calls weren't going through. I checked her social media and all of them had been deactivated, so there was just no way to reach out to her. My friends came back at around 11 in the night, and even they tried to call her from their phones, but with no luck in the end. I was forced to accept that maybe my sister had no plans of coming back that day, and that day turned into a week, then a month, a year, and eventually 6 whole years. My aunt and I had filed a missing persons report 24 hours back then because we just didn't want to admit to ourselves that my sister had pulled this off on purpose and she intended not to come back. It sucked, but a few months later, I did come to terms with it. My sister and I weren't particularly close growing up since she was different from me, but I still loved her like family does. She turned into a bit of a party animal in high school and decided not to attend college. Instead, she moved in with her high school boyfriend in a small apartment at 19 and got a job instead, which is okay. But they'd waste a lot of their income unnecessarily and had no sense of responsibility. Most of it would go into drinks at clubs, clothes and makeup, and her boyfriend's sneaker collection. So she'd ask my aunt for rent, much too often for her liking, and that increased when she got knocked up and had to go to the doctors frequently. Fortunately, my aunt could afford it since she ran a successful business and had never had any husband or kids of her own. We were all the family she had. So she did it without complaint, but I could tell that she wasn't pleased with my sister's lifestyle because she looked very disappointed whenever my sister would come around asking for money. So I made up my mind to work harder to not let her down. Of course, eventually my sister disappeared along with her boyfriend, and none of their friends knew where they'd gone either, so we just had to make our peace with the fact that they probably wouldn't come back for a long time, or maybe ever. I didn't know whether she was even alive up until last week. 6 years have passed, and now I'm an investment banker and I'm living with my aunt in my childhood home. My aunt and I had repurchased the house I grew up in with my parents recently and have been living here ever since. My aunt and I had pretty much accepted that my sister wasn't going to come back, but then she made a sudden reappearance last week and took us both by surprise. She'd been back for 3 weeks and had asked a few of her old friends to help her find us, and she finally had. She seemed happy to see us at first, but my aunt and I had mixed feelings. You don't just disappear for 6 years without warning, then come back and expect everything to be just the same. We tried to be polite and civil to her, but the conversation was strained at best. We didn't ask her where she'd been because, honestly, it didn't feel like there was a point. And she didn't offer to explain herself either. After a while, she finally asked about where her kids were and said that she was eager for them to see their mother again. Now, of course, she wouldn't be able to see her kids right away because her kids didn't live with us. My aunt and I had looked after them for almost a month after she disappeared, but I was a college student, and my aunt was a working woman. When she took my sister and me in, both of us were older than 7 and didn't need constant attention, so it was manageable for her to work and raise us simultaneously. But my nephews were both young and needed to be looked after constantly. I couldn't do that because I needed time to study, and my aunt was getting older and couldn't focus on work and kids at the same time. So, after almost a month, my aunt and I had to make the tough decision of giving them up for adoption. The kids had been technically abandoned, so they were free to be adopted, and after a lengthy process, we were able to rehome them. They were adopted by a really nice couple who were struggling to conceive. Adam and Martha, names changed. We're in touch with them still and often visit the kids to see how they're doing. But I wasn't able to tell my sister all of this because I knew this news wouldn't be well received by any mother. And I didn't want her bothering Adam, Martha, and the kids. So I told her that we'd had to give them up for adoption after she left them with me, but kept the other details to myself. When I told her that I'd given her kids up for adoption, she initially refused to believe me and said that I was messing with her. But my aunt and I didn't even crack a smile. There was nothing funny about this situation in the slightest. After a while, she finally realized that we were telling the truth, and once she did, she totally flipped out on us. She was just hysterical. She began to scream at us, told us that we were cruel and heartless monsters and whatnot, and then started sobbing violently. My aunt and I let her throw a tantrum, but after she seemed to calm down a bit, I asked her to leave since we had nothing to talk about anymore. She did leave, but she was still crying, and it was really disturbing to see her that way because she wasn't a very emotional or expressive person. So for her to completely break down in front of us was a pretty big deal. My aunt and I didn't know how to react to this and decided that we just weren't going to talk about it at all. It was draining enough that my sister had shown up after so long and had expected things to have remained the same after 6 long years and then screamed at us for doing what anyone else in their sane minds would have done. Neither of us wanted to discuss it even more and just make it worse for us. So we didn't talk about it and pretended that it never happened, but yesterday I received an email from my sister and she said a lot of things that I feel like I have to talk about. My aunt has a lot to deal with because her business is doing exceedingly well, and I don't want to disturb her or ruin her vibe right now by bringing this crap up. So I'm here instead. My sister said that she'd been counting on me and she trusted me to keep her kids safe and sound when she was away, but I'd failed her by abandoning them. She was disappointed in me and wanted me to help her find her kids so that she could take them back with her now. She also wanted my aunt and I to apologize to her for behaving badly with her the other day if we wanted her to be a part of our lives. She ended the email by saying that she'd be waiting for a reply and told me to make it quick because she wanted to see her kids as soon as possible. The email reeked of entitlement, and I lost my cool after I read it because it was just disgusting. She hadn't even told us where she'd been for the past 6 years, but for whatever reason, she now expected my aunt and me to act like we were family again. In the heat of the moment, I replied to the email saying that she did her kids a favor by leaving them at my place and then disappearing from all of our lives because now, at least those poor kids have a chance of having a better life that she herself would never have been able to provide for them. I told her that she would have been a terrible mother to her kids and they're lucky that they escaped her, and sent that email. In the evening, my aunt came to my room and told me that my sister's boyfriend had just called her. Her business contact info is listed on her website, and that's the number he called. and told her that she'd received and read the mail that I'd sent and was beside herself with grief. She'd had a total mental breakdown and kept repeating that she wanted her kids back and had to be sedated because that's how grief-stricken she was. I feel really guilty now and feel like I was a little excessive with what I said. AITA for telling my sister that her kids were lucky that she'd abandoned them because they have better parents now. Update 1. Hi folks. Firstly, I just want to thank everyone who responded to the original post. Sending love to everyone with messed up families and psychotic sisters. I know it's not easy, but we deal with it somehow. It's been 3 days since I posted and the response has been overwhelming. Now, I know I'm not at fault here and whatever I said in that email was 100% true. It's not my fault that she had a breakdown because she brought that onto herself by abandoning her kids with no explanation. She never even bothered to communicate that she'd wanted me to take care of them during the time that she'd be gone. She'd lied to me and told me that she'd be back to take them at the end of the day, so I'd signed up to babysit them for a couple of hours, not for the next 6 years of my life. As much as I love my nephews, babies are quite a handful, and I couldn't have them around while also working towards my future. I didn't agree to that, so it was just crazy for my sister to even expect that her kids would still be living with me after 6 years. And now, a couple of things about her email that I just have to address and get it all off my chest. I didn't abandon her kids. If anything, I helped them out by leading them to better and worthier parents who actually care for them enough and take better care of them than my sister did. My sister is the one who abandoned them at my place and went off to God knows where for 6 years. Also, she still hasn't told us where exactly she'd been, and honestly, I don't care enough to ask either. But if she doesn't even owe us that, then it's kind of entitled of her to expect that we owe her anything at all, let alone help find her kids. As for an apology, she can pretty much forget about it because I don't want her to be a part of my life anymore. She hasn't been a part of my life for years, and I'll be just fine if she continues to not be a part of my life. It's been 3 days and we haven't heard from her or her boyfriend again, and I'm okay with that. People can call me heartless, but I don't care about what happened to her after the breakdown. My aunt and I faced several difficulties after she left and were worried sick for many a day, but she didn't bother to check on us either. So why should I extend the same courtesy to her? My sister can play the victim all she wants, but I know for a fact that in this situation she's far from the victim. She's the one who created this mess, and she now has to deal with the aftermath of it herself. I can't even imagine how entitled and delusional a person has to be to act out and throw a tantrum after abandoning her own kids and then finding out that they'd been adopted by a better family. At least we've warned Adam and Martha since they deserve to know. I don't know what exactly they're going to do to deal with this, but I trust them and know that they love the kids with all their heart. And even more, they won't let them come in harm's way. And by harm, I mean my sister. Adam was concerned when I told him and pleaded with me not to let her know who her kids had been adopted by, but I reassured him that he had nothing to worry about because she might be their biological mother, but they were the kids' actual parents. And nothing could take that away from them, not even my sister. That seemed to pacify them a bit, and I actually regretted not letting them know earlier, but I just didn't want them to panic unnecessarily. But it's all right, they know now, and I'm hoping that my sister stays away from all of us after this. Update 2. Okay, so my sister decided to get in touch with me again today. It's the weekend, so my aunt and I were both at home, and she showed up at our house about 3 in the afternoon. We didn't even want to open the door to her because this was getting increasingly ridiculous with every week that passed, and we told her to leave through the intercom, but she told us that she wasn't leaving until we informed her where her kids were right now. Obviously, we cannot give out that information without prior permission to anyone at all, especially not to her. So we told her that we didn't know, and that if she didn't leave, then we'd call the police and make her leave forcefully. And then she began to plead with us. She started saying stuff like she only wanted to see them one time and she didn't even care if she had to see them from a distance, but she just had to get one look at them. There was a lot of pain in her voice, and I could see through the cameras that she was literally on her knees. It broke my heart because no matter what happened, I'm still a human being, and I did feel sorry for her. I felt awful, but I tried to steel myself by reminding myself of what she'd done in the past and thought of the kids before telling her for the last time that she needed to leave, or I really would call the police and report her for trespassing. But she continued to cry right on the doorstep. I was left with no other option and was forced to call the police, who arrived 15 minutes later and took her away. But even then, she put up a fight and had to be taken away kicking and screaming. My aunt had just sat through the whole thing silently with her head in her hands, and I can't even blame her, because this is just heartbreaking. Not because my sister can never get her kids back, but because my aunt literally raised us both, and now she has to watch one of the kids she raised completely fall apart right in front of her eyes. And she couldn't even do anything to fix things. She just had to watch it all happen and let it go. It can't have been easy for her to watch my sister in that state. Neither had it been easy for me, and it's just really disturbing because I know she's suffering a lot right now. But she has nobody else to blame for this situation except herself. I don't know why exactly she disappeared, but no matter what the reason was, I highly doubt it makes what she did any more forgivable. I just want her to go back to wherever she was. Not out of hatred, but simply because I don't have the emotional strength to watch my sister break down over and over again and cause someone else this amount of pain. I just can't do this again and again. I might even have to start looking at lawyers to get a restraining order against her. I don't know how effective that'll be, or even if I qualify for it, because this is technically not a dangerous situation that we're in. But we never know. Things can go south really quickly. More so with my sister, especially since she's clearly very emotionally volatile right now. I just don't know what to do or what to think, and I'm absolutely numb right now. Nothing feels the same anymore. After my sister's return, and I highly doubt I can go back to living my usual life again, in a way, it's ironic that she first disrupted all our lives by disappearing, and she's currently doing the same thing with her reappearance. It puts into perspective how selfish she actually is and how she can never be bothered to think about literally anyone except herself. I hope she and her boyfriend have been able to make something of themselves in the last 6 years, because I just want them to go away now. I don't even care where she'd been or where she went. I just want her gone, and for good, because nothing is going to come out of her return. Update 3. My sister just sent me another email 5 hours ago, and I came back home immediately after reading it and told my aunt to do the same after forwarding it to her. 2 days have passed since the last update, and today we finally received an explanation as to where my sister had been for the last 6 years of our lives. So 6 years ago, a month or so before she disappeared, her boyfriend's uncle offered him a job for free at his hotel in Miami, but he'd made it very clear that he couldn't bring his kids along. My sister was still welcome if she could make herself useful in some way, so she went with him, and the two of them started working there for a much higher salary than what they made here. She didn't tell us anything about it because she believed that if my aunt found out about what she was earning, then she might ask her to repay all the money that my aunt had helped her out with, and out of fear and greed, she kept her mouth shut about where she'd gone. Over time, they'd worked hard and been promoted, and they'd finally saved enough to start a business of their own in Miami, which is what they were about to do. But first, they decided to take a trip back here so that they could finally take their kids back with them. They hadn't had the foresight to think that we might have actually given their kids up for adoption, because my sister was sure that my aunt and I loved them too much to let them go anywhere else. So she'd been counting on us to look after them in her absence and raise them well so she could take over whenever she'd be able to, which happens to be now. But there was just one hitch in her brilliant plan, and that was that she hadn't even told us anything about this and had disappeared without a word. She'd probably forgotten that my aunt and I were real human beings with minds of our own and not just robots who would follow whatever she'd programmed us to, without questioning it at all. So now she was begging us through her email to at least let her see her kids before she went back and keep in touch with the adoptive parents so she could have some degree of contact with her kids. I don't fully understand what the intention of this email was, probably to make us realize that she'd been working through these years and that would suddenly make us have a change of heart or something. But if that really was the intended impact of her story, then my sister has failed miserably. She didn't talk to us for 6 whole years because she was too afraid that my aunt would ask her to pay her back, which is just so insane. First of all, my aunt is the last person to ask the US for money. And even if she had, my sister should have had the gratitude to do it without question because she owed it to our aunt. Also, on top of that, I don't think any parent who's ready to abandon their kids for 6 years without even looking back to check on them for the sake of a couple of extra bucks deserves any sympathy. Least of all, not someone as materialistic and shallow as my sister. Whatever she'd done was unforgivable, and her story just made it worse. But at least now, we don't have to feel sorry for her anymore. She's just a despicable excuse of a human being, and my aunt and I decided to block her without even a response, because that's just what she deserves. We've also told Adam and Martha about the email, and if they're willing to opt for legal action against her to prevent her from harassing us any further, then we'll definitely be joining them. My aunt and I are disappointed that she turned out this way, but we're not surprised in the slightest. We're surprised that she and her boyfriend were able to make something of themselves, but that's about it. If they try anything funny with us after this, then they'll be looking at a restraining order, but I don't suppose she'll risk that, since she has her new business to look forward to now. I wish she would just go back and never return. I don't want to see her ever again. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.